What's up, everyone? Welcome into the Dare Miss Fantasy Show with me, your host, Tara Roberts. This is the official mailbag show for Player Profiler. It is Wednesday, February 25th. We are closing in on the combine, and I am taking your questions live. And this week's topic, we've been talking a lot of free agency, and we'll still talk free agency, of course, because free agency talk never ends. And we're getting closer and closer, and we're getting more rumors, and we got more contracts and stuff. And I do not believe on this show that we have talked about the contracts. No, we couldn't have it. That happened this weekend. So we have not talked about the contract for Javonte Williams and the fallout that we will have from that. So we'll touch on that. We do have some interesting free agency quarterback news. Aaron Rodgers supposedly is going to make his decision within the next, they said mid-March or so, they said late February, which is right now. So I would assume they were targeting more of the mid-March area, which is good, which is also funny because I think that means that basically he's going to force them to forego the free agency period with any of those quarterbacks in case they were thinking about bringing somebody in, which would put them in the position to have to rely on, if they were seeking another quarterback, a rookie. So that'll be interesting, or possibly make a trade for one of the wayward quarterbacks that teams are looking to move on from or could be potentially cut. Obviously, we had Kirk Cousins cut. That puts him on the market. So yeah, there's a little bit of news, but I thought we would switch it up. And since we are in the combine week here, and do some reactions to mock drafts. I've got mock drafts from Mel Kiper and Daniel Jeremiah, and we'll go through those. We will call out the players that we care about. We'll look at some other ones because, right, there's a lot of teams that obviously could use some, quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, assistants, but obviously not everybody can get those in the first round. And offensive linemen and defensive linemen, and linebackers and whatnot, they're all in cornerbacks. My gosh, secondary, Jesus, they're all just as important, even though they are technically not super relevant for us unless you play IDP. Obviously, then they are super relevant, but still at the same time. It's important for us to note how these teams are moving, particularly with offensive line, and how that affects teams that really need to upgrade their quarterback protection. So we'll look at that, and we'll run through the drafts, try and figure out what we do like, what we don't like, what's some consensus here, because obviously there are some things that are repeating in a lot of mock drafts, not just those two mock drafts from Kiper and Daniel Jeremiah, but from ones that I looked out throughout the league. There's obviously some trends that we see, some commonalities of predictions for teams, and we'll get more feedback as we kind of go through the combines, because we'll see how all of these players perform, those who do perform at the combine. But not only that, we'll get the rumors about interviews, and those can be very critical. It's good to know how teams feel. Obviously, they do hold some weight in terms of teams that potentially have negative reactions to interviews that they have with players as well at the combine. We've seen that last year with Shedeur Sanders and how that affected draft capital. So obviously those are critical things for us to pay attention to. So it'll be interesting because obviously there's a lot up in the air, particularly with the quarterbacks. Fernando Mendoza is obviously not going to be throwing at the combine because, well, when you are projected to be the first overall pick, you just flat out don't do that. But there are a lot of other quarterbacks in the combine, and we've talked about them a little bit. I don't know if we've talked about, I've put up a wide variety of videos, obviously, when we were talking about the Senior Bowl and quarterback prospects, my top 5 quarterback prospects and stuff like that, when we were looking at my YouTube channel videos. But I don't know that we've talked about it here, but no surprise to you guys, because if you're watching, you're obviously pretty tapped in there. It's a slim market for the rookie quarterbacks, right? Which obviously puts a little bit more pressure on a lot of these teams to try and evaluate to see if any of these guys outside of Fernando Mendoza, particularly Ty Simpson, has the ability to really move his draft capital. Obviously, we've talked about, during Senior Bowl week, the potential of guys like Garrett Nussmeier, I don't know why I want to call him Garrett Nussmeier, to make some moves and potentially move up the draft board. He looked really sharp in that Senior Bowl. I thought there was a clear separation between him and the other quarterbacks. Cole Payton was somebody that was very popular there as well. So there's moves here because a lot of teams are quarterback needy. But obviously, when we're looking at free agency, it's funny because free agency is never really spicy at quarterback, because even if your quarterback isn't fantastic, you typically don't let them hit free agency, right? So when you look at like a guy like Trevor Lawrence, first overall pick, obviously there's a lot of controversy. They still gave him that contract because at the end of the day, teams just don't let quarterbacks walk. So we don't really get these guys, unfortunately, these young guys coming in on the free agency market. But it's very interesting because we've got guys like Malik Willis, who is obviously going to get a ton of attention. Look, very sharp there for the Packers and his rehabilitation with Matt LaFleur. Kirk Cousins, as I mentioned, is now on the market. Kyler Murray, Tua Tagovailoa could be on the market very soon, whether that's via trade or it's teams just cutting their losses and saying, okay, obviously we just got to eat this money and cut them and move on. Geno Smith, we'll see what happens there with him. Obviously, Fernando Mendoza, the quarterback of the future there. Justin Fields, the Jets, still technically in contract, but we would assume that they will more than likely be moving on from him. It just didn't work out. He was benched. He was not successful there, and he does not like them either. So I don't think he wants to be there. And then we've got free agents like Daniel Jones and Aaron Rodgers. And then, then you get into your other guys like Marcus Mariota, your Russell Wilsons, Joe Flacco's and whatnot, Trey Lance, Tyrod Taylor, Zach Wilson's, and Kenny Pickett's, right? Your backups, right? So, but it'll be interesting with a lot of these bigger names on the market and seeing if we do some shuffle there, because as we saw with head coaches, it is not when you have a lot of openings, the opportunity to reshuffle does happen occasionally there. So we will see on that end. But welcome in, guys. Thank you for watching. Let's go ahead and do these mock drafts. We'll just go ahead and jump into it because I don't know if I can actually share my screen on my YouTube channel, what the copyright legalities of that, if I pull up the NFL's website and show the mock draft is. I just literally took a screenshot of a list. I made a list and just took a screenshot of it. So if you're watching on the YouTube channel, it's nothing fancy, but it will get the job done here. So I'm going to go ahead and put that up here for you guys to see. There we go. And again, it's not fancy by any means, but it gives us something to look at. I believe this one is, I did not label it, so let me double check. This one right here that I am showing is Mel Kiper's. So looking at this from a fantasy football perspective there, right? Obviously right up there at the top, Fernando Mendoza to the Raiders. We pretty much know that is going to happen unless something goes incredibly sideways there. Now, we do have a run of some quarterback needy teams here in terms of the Jets and the Cardinals. Obviously, the Jets straight up need a quarterback. The Cardinals probably would like to move on from Kyler Murray. We should note that they do have Jacoby Brissett in contract. So I think that gives them a lot of flexibility to where a team like the Jets obviously would want to invest in a rookie quarterback. Pick number 2 was far too high. Maybe they look at trading down, or maybe they just, potentially trade back into the first like the Giants did last year in order to get a quarterback later at a more reasonable draft capital, because spending a second on any of these other guys just wouldn't make logical sense there. But obviously they have to have a quarterback. But when we're talking about a team like the Cardinals, not so much, because again, Jacoby Brissett did fine last year. Obviously from a winning perspective, that didn't happen, but the team flowed. And at the end of the day, at the very least, they don't have to spend that first round draft capital and overspend, like Pittsburgh with the Kenny Pickett situation, just because, oh my God, we got to have a quarterback here. They can wait until day 2, because Jacoby Brissett would be an excellent bridge quarterback. Great veteran, would be excellent in helping a young rookie, a day 2 rookie, ease into the NFL. Good teaching opportunity there. And obviously we've got the new coaching staff in Arizona, Matt LaFleur, which I think is perfectly fine, right? As a hire there, brings the LA Rams system there. Nathaniel Hackett, I'm not perfectly fine with, but obviously there's a tie there, right? And a connection there. And there's the Green Bay connection as well. So I would not be shocked, honestly, if, my thought process is that I do think Malik Willis could be a really good target for them in free agency if they don't want to roll with Jacoby Brissett, just because of the ties there with Green Bay. Obviously, they would have, the direct contact there with Mike LaFleur. and a good vouch for him. So that one is pretty reasonable for me. So I do think that these first two teams here, we're going to probably, again, we're going to be going on after Fernando Mendoza in the draft, probably a good defensive run there. And as you look at the two different things, if you see, I've literally, this is the information from the mock drafts from Mel Kiper, and then we'll look at Daniel Jeremiah. So if there's any mistakes on there, don't blame me. It's, if you're like, that's edge and it's listed as OLB, same thing, right? I don't know. It's just the preference of how they list it. And it's going to be listed as edge on Daniel Jeremiah. So I don't know why they have different preferences for how they list things. But after that, we finally get another offensive player for the Browns here, drafting the first wide receiver off the board here in Carnell Tate. I think that one makes a ton of sense. Now, obviously, the Browns have been very invested on defense, enjoying taking those first-round defensive picks. They've also been rumored to apparently be a candidate for a trade back, which they did last year. Makes sense that they might potentially want to do that. But if we know one thing for sure, I dropped a wide receiver landing spot video last week. Cleveland has to get a wide receiver one. Getting one in free agency is going to be difficult because you run into the situation of, and I like to make, I like to use Jacksonville as my shining comparison example. Think back when Jacksonville overpaid Christian Kirk to be their wide receiver one. And they did so because at the time, Jacksonville was such an unappealing location that they had to pay up to get the wide receiver of their choice, right? To get any wide receiver to go there, they were going to have to spend money because it was just such a destitute situation. So it'd kind of be the same thing with the Browns. They would not be an ideal location for anyone to want to sign with in free agency unless they overpaid significantly for a wide receiver one. So drafting a wide receiver one here when you have the draft capital to be able to do so does make a ton of sense here. So Carnell Tate to them, they need a wide receiver one. Jerry Jeudy's not it. Unfortunately, Cedric Tillman is not it either. They got Isaiah Bond and whatnot. But at the end of the day, they have to have a wide receiver one regardless of what the quarterback situation is there. So Carnell Tate to the Browns makes a ton of sense. Get the top guy of the class, go ahead and knock it out the way, and then figure out the quarterback situation, unfortunately. When we're also looking at that quarterback situation there, obviously Shedeur Sanders on roster, Dillon Gabriel on roster, Deshaun Watson on roster. There have been rumors that Deshaun Watson looks the best out of all the quarterbacks they have there. That makes sense. At the end of the day, whether or not that will actually translate onto the field in a real game at this point in his career after the multiple Achilles issues, I don't know if I believe that. I kind of don't. But I'm certain that in just the general practice and throwing around, not actually in pads or anything, I'm sure that he looks better than Shedeur Sanders and Dillon Gabriel. Why would he not when it comes to just throwing the ball? So logically, that's not surprising to me. That does not mean that it would make him a shoe-in to be the starting quarterback, in my opinion. Also, we got to realize that the Browns probably want to push positive things out on Deshaun Watson if they want to get rid of him potentially at some point this season, right? Kind of similar to the way that they were pushing a whole bunch of positive news about Kenny Pickett. Kenny Pickett, he could be the starter, the number 2 guy. They knew at the end of the day, they had no interest in Kenny Pickett being on the roster. They were trying to hype him up because he was their best tradable asset there. So don't be surprised at that. But they got to figure out the quarterback situation. But grabbing that wide receiver one is key. You got the Commanders there taking linebacker. Saints, though, coming in. And then this has been a very common mock here. And I'm not surprised on this one. So the Saints drafting a wide receiver, Mekhi Lemon. That, I would not be shocked if that does happen. That seems right on the money there. I personally, obviously, as a Chris Olave Dynasty manager who was living large at the end of last season with Tyler Shuck coming in and bringing Chris Olave to life to like a top 5. He was, mind you, once Tyler Shuck became the quarterback to close out that season, Chris Olave was a top 5 receiver in average fantasy points per game. I love that connection. I'm obsessed with it. So selfishly, I don't want another wide receiver to come in there and take targets, but they do have room. They don't have a wide receiver too. They have a lot of holes to fill just in general. I think they're a candidate for taking best available talent here. And makes sense, right? And that's what they did last year. So I would not be shocked if they didn't necessarily go with the most position of need. Obviously, running back is a position of need here too. We've seen perhaps Alvin Kamara is unfortunately past his prime, right? And while they went through a wide variety of backup running backs to try and make it work there, just no one popped off. At the end of the day, they need to, despite the fact that Alvin Kamara clearly has no interest in moving on, they're probably going to have to bring another running back in there for sure. So occasionally I have seen Jeremiah Love mocked here, but I don't think that they'll go that route considering the position that they're in. And I don't think they'll make that choice from an organizational perspective. Locking in a wide receiver does make more sense here, even if it is locking in a wide receiver too. But at the end of the day, more weapons in that offense makes sense. And they have the room for another wide receiver to be added without having a massive effect to Chris Olave. Obviously, there will be an effect, but there's room because at this point, Devon Vele was traded for to be the wide receiver 2 there. Obviously, that didn't work out. So it's literally just Chris Olave and Juwan Johnson there. So adding in a wide receiver here would really round out the offense, and they can add a running back day 2. It's not a super deep class at running back, in my opinion, but there are a lot of guys that are good pieces. Not a lot of true 3-down backs in the way that we saw with last year's draft, right? To where we were just eating good in round 2, right? But at the end of the day, I think there's enough there to where a day 2 pick, round 2, even round 3 there realistically could get the job done. And you know what? I realize that now I can't. I got to remove my banner here. You guys, let's see. Let me remove, sorry for the people listening on the podcast. I realized that for YouTube viewers to actually see this, I have to remove my banner so that they can see the entire list. All right, there we go. Moving back to this, obviously the big marquee piece, the most commonly, the one that I've seen most commonly mocked outside of Fernando Mendoza, right? Number 9, the Chiefs, Jeremiah Love. And I know this will traumatize all of you from a fantasy perspective. I totally get it because we have seen the first round running back to the Chiefs before, and we were thrilled and we were all excited to draft Clyde Edwards-Helaire at the end of the first, early second, and that did not work out, people. That did not work out for us. So I understand the apprehension that we might have here. But clearly the Chiefs are going to be moving on. Obviously, there has been a lot of smoke. Now, granted, again, these mock drafts are going to adjust over the next couple of weeks, right? Because at the end of the day, when people are doing the mock drafts, they're not accounting for the possibility of big free agency signings there. And for me personally, like as I'm looking through it, one of my favorite places to, and maybe this is a good place for us to talk about for briefly, Javonte Williams signing the extension with Dallas, which was which was my prediction. I thought that that's what they were going to do. I believe, when Dallas, to their credit, do I love Jerry Jones? No. But when he says they aren't going to do something low key, you kind of can trust it, even if it makes no logical sense. So they have been kind of transparent about the fact that they did want to retain Javonte Williams. So that was not surprising. I thought the contract was right on the money. $24 million, $8 million a year, 16 million guaranteed, very reasonable there. Javonte, obviously, that makes a ton of sense for him as a home there. Finally having that nice rebound opportunity in his career, getting away from Sean Payton. And that's a good bargain for them. Obviously, when choosing between, they've got, they had to figure out what they were going to do with him and George Pickens. George Pickens is far more complicated. It's a far bigger money situation. So just going ahead and knocking out that little contract with Javonte Williams makes a ton of sense. So again, right on the money there. No big surprise. We would expect Breece Hall and Kenneth Walker to be above that. So that's, again, not a surprise there. When we're talking about free agency news, we have heard that Breece Hall is going to be tagged the Jets. And people said I was crazy when I said that I thought that they were going to do that because they were like, it doesn't make logical sense. But as I like to say, when you're thinking about the Jets, you can't think from a logical perspective. You got to think like the Jets. And while it doesn't make sense to make a big monetary investment and try to force a running back to stay when you're an extreme rebuilding team that sold away your top defensive assets and you don't have a quarterback and your asset that you have is a wide receiver, that's it, period. And you don't have an offensive line. There are so many things that you need to tackle. Why are you looking at a running back? But hey, that's what Jets do, right? So logically, that was bound to happen. So Brees Hall, unfortunately, not walking away. They're going to try and force him to stay. Franchise tag. They're going to try and force, work with him on a long-term contract. I don't know why he would want to stay, but at the end of the day, money is money. So if that is the best situation for him, we might see him stay there. But Kenneth Walker not getting the franchise, not expected to get the franchise tag. So that will put Kenneth Walker on the market here, getting that higher market value than Javonte Williams. Travis Etienne is where we really want to key in on. He'll try and up that mark and get above a contract that Javonte Williams got, which makes sense. Slightly above that would be a good target for him. That would make things a little bit more difficult in terms of making things more competitive for Jacksonville to re-sign him, because now he is going to be one of the top available running backs there with Kenneth Walker. So when you're looking at it, teams are going to be looking at him very hard there because Kenneth Walker will be coming in at a higher price tag. Travis Etienne can do everything he can do at a lower price point. We've heard a lot of smoke around the Chiefs being a team very interested in him. I love that landing spot. That's a beautiful fit for me. I would love to see him there. I think he is the perfect back for the Chiefs, how they want to use him. He can operate in a 3-down back as well. Patrick Mahomes does enjoy checking down to a running back if the running back is competent. Obviously, we've seen the running back struggles over the past year. Unfortunately, consistency hasn't been a thing. They tried to force a committee, didn't really work out for them or from a fantasy perspective. So moving on to a running back that's more of a do-all kind of running back there, and a dynamic pass catcher for them does make a ton of sense. Obviously, they cleared a lot of cap space there to make some signings. There's been a lot of smoke. We talked about this last week, but obviously, there's a lot of, rumors around Tyreek Hill potentially going to the Chiefs. That's not something that I think we would see anytime soon. So I don't think the money was really cleared for that. We've seen, some players, I think it was Chris Jones saying, publicly saying like, we want him to come back. I don't think there was any love lost there. So he didn't really talk bad about the Chiefs, in my opinion. He was just more so trying to hype up Tua. So I don't think a bridge was burned in a very negative way. So possibility, but at the end of the day, he's rehabbing from a serious injury. So that's probably something that we would see as a potential signing further on down the line, not something that would happen immediately unless they really have a good idea of where he is at in his recovery timeline. So money spent in terms of all the free agency money that they created, I do think is going to tilt more towards other positions, and running back does make sense. But if they don't go that direction, and we will know here soon, this mock draft to Jeremiah Love to the Chiefs does make a ton of sense there. Does make a ton of sense. And I think that's something that we will continue to see until they sign a running back. Then we have with the Bengals, defensive end, obviously, Trey Hendrickson up in the air. Miami, they're taking a offensive lineman. We've got the Cowboys. Cowboys are going to be picking defense. Perhaps they find a lineman that they like, but defensive picks makes the most sense for them with their picks. They've got multiple picks here in the first round because of the trades that they made. So we will probably see multiple defensive picks come off the board for them. They got the Rams taking a defensive player as well. Cornerback, that is a clear position of need. And then we finally get to another fantasy football player for us. The Ravens taking a wide receiver in Jordan Tyson. Yeah, that's a big possibility there. I like the Ravens as a potential landing spot for a wide receiver, especially we know that they have been interested in veteran wide receivers before in terms of signing veteran wide receivers and trying to make it work like that. Maybe they go that way and get a veteran wide receiver on the market, but at the end of the day, it might just be time to do a little reset here and get some young blood in there to go alongside Zay Flowers, who I think is a nice 1B, not really a 1A in my opinion. So getting Jordan Tyson in there does make a ton of sense. After that, again, we kind of get a little break here from the offensive players, not a little break, a lot of break there. what is it? The Jets, Bucks, Jets, Lions, Vikings, Panthers, Cowboys through pick 20, all taking defensive players there. So big defensive draft, but we kind of knew that. Then 21, pick number 21, the Steelers and Ty Simpson. This has been a common place that I have seen him mocked, not just recently, but really early on. This was kind of the spot that everyone was kind of saying, like, hey, we feel comfortable with him at this point, right? Before, now, granted, this was earlier once the season was ended, once we realized that Dante Moore was not going to be in it, right? Saying that Ty Simpson was the only other option that was more of a first round caliber quarterback. I think there's a lot of question marks about it. I don't think it's a 100% sold, but it seems like he has good separation from the rest of the guys in the class. So him sneaking into a mid to late first round pick does make sense with so many quarterback needy teams. And obviously the Steelers, by that time, hopefully, because we got to remember last season at this point when the Steelers were in the draft, they did not have a quarterback. Aaron Rodgers had not made a decision to sign with them at that point. So we know that they're willing to risk it with zero information on their quarterback situation and go through the draft without knowing that. But I don't think they will do that this year because, hopefully Aaron Rodgers is going to make that decision well before. But even if they do, and obviously they would have to talk him through because, they don't enjoy or Aaron Rodgers does not enjoy rookie quarterbacks being drafted under him, unfortunately. We'll see. He's older, so maybe now he wants to do the whole mentorship thing. I will say that's no knock. He obviously Jordan Love speaks very highly of him. But if they are able to draft a quarterback, taking Ty Simpson here is very interesting. Obviously, it does ring Kenny Pickett vibes of when they did that before. But I think Ty Simpson is more of an appropriate first round draft there. If not, obviously there is a ton of teams here that are being speculated to be interested in him. You have the ability to trade up, or perhaps he falls a little bit later. I've seen where people speculate that maybe if he falls, perhaps the Rams would be interested in drafting him as a guy that they sit behind Matt Stafford. We know teams like Miami would potentially, and Cleveland, I don't think Cleveland will, but Miami potentially, and Arizona potentially maybe trading back up into the first in order to grab him. So I think this is the baseline. I don't know how much higher he'll go than that. If we see him not go at this point, I do think we could see other teams trade up into the end of the first there to potentially get him. After that, we've got some linemen there. We got the Chargers taking a guard. Does make sense. Their offensive line overall, when everyone is healthy, is not an issue, but investing in guard seems like a smart on the money choice for them. Then we got the Eagles take this. Now the Eagles, this pick for the Eagles is very interesting. Dallas Goedert is a free agent. And obviously there's the drama around AJ Brown, right? And they don't really have anyone in terms of any backup options that would really step up and take over if they move on from Dallas Goedert. So if they do intend to move on from Dallas Goedert, they would get someone in free agency, or perhaps they could do both, right? Maybe draft a more veteran, a little bit older tight end with a reasonable contract there, and then also draft a tight end as well. So Kenyon Sadiq to the Eagles, very interesting there. I don't mind that at all as a nice mock for them. After that, we've got the Browns taking an offensive lineman, Bears tackle, Bills. Bills have been consistently mocked. Now, depending on what mock you look like. Now, this is not, and obviously there's variabilities because once you get towards the end of a first round, everyone's rankings for how they rank their wide receiver prospects are going to be very different. And so you will often see the Bills mock to get a wide receiver, but you will often see that it is a completely different receiver every single time. So finding the right receiver for the Bills and assuming that they are 100% going to take a receiver because, again, they need a wide receiver one. I talked about this in my wide receiver landing spots video. I am not a fan of the Bills as a landing spot. So I don't love this for a rookie. I don't love this for a free agent. I'm not a fan of the Bills as a landing spot for a wide receiver one, just because under Joe Brady, we have seen them be very unsuccessful. We've seen a shift in the way that they use wide receivers, even with Stephon Diggs on roster. There was a clear, you guys can go look at the video, but there was a clear dramatic shift immediately when Joe Brady took over as offensive coordinator. And I don't think that's a coincidence. I don't think it's as much of a personnel issue. Now, there's a personnel issue, but I don't think it's as much of a personnel issue as much as it is. I don't think their offense provides the targeted volume to create a true wide receiver one. They need to find what works well with them. It needs to be somebody who is obviously not like Khalil Shakir. Let Khalil Shakir play more of the slot short area role and get somebody who is that. They need a speedy. Don't go out and get more of a contested catch guy. I think I would recommend more of a speedy, less of a contested catch guy. True speedy, deep threat wide receiver to play off of him might be something that works a little better than them. So it'll change depending on what mock draft you're looking at. But again, wide receiver is a very popular mock to the Bills. Doesn't make sense. Then we have offensive lineman to the 49ers. Texans here is the very interesting one. This is the last fantasy draft pick that we have in the first round here. The Texans mocked to get Jadarian Price, running back from Notre Dame. Yeah, interesting. I have the Texans pegged to make a move in free agency. I think that they are an excellent landing spot for Kenneth Walker. And if they did do that, I would not expect them to make a first-round investment into a running back. But the fact that we do have multiple mocks showing running back for the Texans does lean more credence to the fact that, unfortunately, despite the fact that I like Woody Marks, you guys might like Woody Marks, but I don't think there's any true loyalty there or any intention to have Woody Marks continue on as the lead back. So FYI, if you're holding those Woody Marks Dynasty shares, you might want to think about flipping those before we hit free agency and before we hit the draft. You might do that real quick because they're losing value as we speak. They have made no clear commitment, and we have seen them, unfortunately, phase out a running back that transitioned to being the starter. We saw, obviously, Dameon Pierce. What a disaster from a fantasy perspective. But we've seen it before. We will see it again. I do think that if they do not snag their high-end running back of choice, and I do think they will target a running back in free agency. I do. If they don't snag the one that they want, drafting a first-round running back is a big possibility here. I would not put it past them. I personally would not think it would be the best route for them. They can wait till day 2 and probably want to spend that first round pick on an offensive lineman. That should be your priority there, but that can also be tackled in free agency as well. So it just depends on how they want to go about it. We'll learn more about this as they unfold in their free agency moves there, but running back or offensive lineman for them does make a ton of sense there. Defense is stacked, probably going to be an offensive player. The wide receivers that they drafted, I think they worked out well. They showcase well. Those little 2 pair of Iowa State wide receivers that they drafted showcase good enough to play off of Nico Collins. So I'm okay with that moving forward. I don't think they need to make any other investment there as well. Not at tight end as well. So I think that kind of wraps things up for that first one there. I'm going to exit out there, see if we've got any comments here in the chat because I'm full screen, so I can't see any of the comments there. I got a nice little Houdat shout out there from Steel Bill. Yeah, you could be in offensive heaven there in New Orleans. And then from Johansson, AJ Brown has got to be career over at this point. I think that, first of all, I don't think they're going to. So knowing the Eagles organization, they will not trade him if the value is not right. That is one thing about them, is that they move clearly from what is best from the organizational standpoint. And if AJ is unhappy, they figure they can make that work in any way, shape, or form, right? If they move on from him, it's going to be a trade, a high-end trade to a wide receiver needy team. Obviously, there's been a lot of teams floated around, right? Because a lot of teams need wide receiver ones. There are teams like San Francisco that needs a clear, unfortunately, you can't depend on Ricky Pearsall at this point. So San Francisco does need a wide receiver one. Obviously, teams like he can't go back to, he's not going to go back to Tennessee, but Tennessee needs a wide receiver one. Buffalo needs a wide receiver one. New England needs a wide receiver one. Everybody needs a wide receiver one at this point. So there's plenty of options. If they truly can't make it work there with Philadelphia, I would expect that we would see him traded at some point. To a team that needs a wide receiver one for good compensation. People are gonna pay. They're gonna pay. Let's see here. Ooh, good question here from Johansson. At what round is my Seahawks going to draft a running back? Seahawks are always Seahawks are fun to try and predict with draft because their philosophy is pretty clear. They draft best available talent, and you could try to predict it, right? But I mean, if it's not an early pick, it's tough to kind of try and figure out what is going to be the best available talent at that point. Positional needs are cool and all, but that's clearly what led their strategy of best available talent is what led them to draft Zach Charbonnet in the second round in the first place, right after they drafted Kenneth Walker. They're stacking their team with the top talent. Like you figure out the positional needs and how to fill in after that. I think that when we're looking at the Seahawks, because now it'll definitely be a day 2 guy. I suspect round 3. Now, granted, they've taken multiple round 2 running backs, so really, that would make sense, right? If that's been a tendency with them, but I think that they could wait until round 3 because, again, as you guys kind of saw, there's a lot of defensive talent in this draft, so I think we're going to get very good value on running backs potentially in the 3rd round, where a lot of guys you might see. We had that nice little round 2 run last year at running back. Might be more of a round 3 run this year, in my opinion. So round 3 would be a good place for them. And because the the free agency class at running back is insanely deep, I also kind of think that they'll make a purchase in free agency that is very reasonably priced. You got to think of somebody who will play well off of Zach Charbonnet. So perhaps, well, granted, Zach Charbonnet is a fine 3-down back, good pass catcher. He can, fulfill all of those roles. But when I'm looking at potential, let me pull up my free agency list here. I would not be shocked if they targeted like a Kenneth Gainwell type would play well off of a Zach Charbonnet. Isaiah Pacheco would make sense bumped up to him. Brian Robinson wouldn't make sense. Rico Dowdle wouldn't make sense. Depending on what the price is for Rashad White would play well off of Zach Charbonnet. But they're going to have to look at both a running back and potentially drafting because Charbonnet, again, he's a free agent in 2027. I would not expect him to be available to even play in 2026 until mid-October at best. That would be kind of like a really optimistic timeline because of how late it was. So yeah, I think round 3 running back for them and an investment in free agency, a reasonable cost investment that they don't have to spend a lot of money that will end up playing well off of Zach Charbonnet does make some sense there. Miles Logan 91 says AJ could end up in San Francisco. I think so too. It is the only thing that might make them hesitate is that coming off of the drama with Brandon Ayuk, do they want to, draft or do they want to trade for a running back that is also known to be a bit dramatic? That might be the only holdup. But the difference is that when AJ Brown gets dramatic, he stays on the field. Those are 2 different kinds of dramatics. Brandon Ayuk is a bailout kind of dramatic. AJ Brown is I'm gonna be mad, but I'm still show up to work kind of dramatic. So to me, drama queens and everything, I don't think it's that big of a deal. He's more of like a Stephon Diggs kind of drama, right? In my opinion, Stephon Diggs is gonna be dramatic, but at the end of the day, Stephon Diggs is gonna show up on the field. So 2 different types of drama there. That's again why I just don't trust Brandon Ayuk whatsoever. Hello, Rachel Tootsie Pop 6 in the chat. What's up to you? Let's jump back to the mock draft here. Actually, let's take a little commercial break here, and then we'll jump back to the mock draft, and we'll look at Daniel Jeremiah's mock draft real quick and see the differences in that one. And I will be right back after we hear a quick word from our sponsors. We'll be right back after this, guys.
If you play in Dynasty, you need Dynasty Deluxe, our premium package for Dynasty Leaguers. We rank over 300 players, updated every week, all year long. And there's a win now mode and a rebuild mode with Superflex and tight end premium controls. And a Dynasty League sync where you can say, sync down all of my sleeper teams, all my FFPC teams, and then you can browse around your leagues for who has needs, and then you can use our trade finder to see what kinds of trades are happening in leagues that are similar to the one I want to do. Then you can analyze trades using our trade analyzer, which balances the lifetime value, which includes pick values out to like 2028. All of that plus the rookie guide, $25 value, is included. So if you're just in one Dynasty League, Dynasty Deluxe is well worth it. And use your host's promo code, and you can bump up to all in and get $25 off.
And we are back there. All right, let's pull up the second mock draft. Let's see if I pull up the right one. Is this? Yep, this is the other one. It would have helped if I had actually labeled the name of whose mock draft it actually was. You would think logically, but hey, I did the best I could on short notice. Mock draft number 2 here belongs to Daniel Jeremiah, his 2.0 mock draft here. Again, we will always see Fernando Mendoza at the top. And then you start to see the differences here. The big difference that we see here is that we've got the Giants being the ones that take Carnell Tate there. In Mel Kiper's draft, he went to the Browns there. The Giants drafting a wide receiver, obviously you could say that's a little bit of overkill offensively. I don't think it's the worst thing to have 2 early first round investments into a wide receiver. Obviously, Malik Neighbors is very talented, but just putting in another dynamic weapon in there for Jackson Dart and really building around the youth of that offense. You will have like the core youth. The only bad thing about that core youth is you'll have to pay them all at once. But the core youth that you would have there with Jackson Dart and Malik Neighbors and Carnell Tate would be very appealing. I don't peg them for going that route. I do think they will add another wide receiver for sure. But this draft class at wide receiver is a bit deeper than I think it is at running back. I like it more at wide receiver. And I do think that they would be able to get a high quality wide receiver too to play off of Malik Neighbors in the early second round. So I don't think this pick is necessary, but hey, it's a luxury pick. They've got a lot, they've got young talent on defense to build around. There's moves that they can make this offseason, obviously, moves that need to be made, to just reinforce the offensive line there. But at the end of the day, if they feel like they have the luxury to take this high-end asset here at pick number 5 and that they fall in love with him and can't pass it up, I mean, it would make sense because, again, seeing Wan'Dale Robinson move on to another team in free agency seems like the most likely move, in my opinion. So they're going to need to add a wide receiver. Dipping into free agency and upgrading off of Wan'Dale Robinson significantly, I don't know that you're going to do it. You can upgrade a little bit, right? In terms of options that we have available in free agency. But at the end of the day, a young wide receiver does make sense. So after that, the next one that we see, again, another commonality here, Mekhi Lemon to the Saints. We saw that in Mel Kiper's draft. I think that's something that we will continue to see fairly regularly in terms of the month there. We talked about it there earlier if you guys missed it. Wide receiver to the Saints, pretty common mock there. Mekhi Lemon, commonly second wide receiver off of the board there. Obviously, things could change as we, get close, go through the combine and get closer to the draft there. But that seems pretty consistent. And at the end of the day, a wide receiver 2 is needed on this team. So doing it in the first round, maybe not 100% necessary, but getting another dynamic weapon in there for Tyler Shuck, who did show extremely well, does make a ton of sense. Again, here's another repeat here. Jeremiah Love to the Chiefs. We talked about it earlier, so we won't go diving into it too much there. But at the end of the day, running back is going to be the main position of need that they're going to be trying to fulfill here. Grabbing a high-end guy like Jeremiah Love, if they're not able to get their ideal ad in free agency at running back, makes a ton of sense. Next, offensive player that we see here is the Ravens and Jordan Tyson. That was the mock that we saw from Mel Kiper as well, right? Yep, that's the same exact one that we saw from Mel Kiper. Again, Ravens dipping into the youth here rather than going with the retread, older veteran option there on free agency market that they've typically done. At the end of the day, yeah, they gave a little money to Rashad Bateman. It didn't really work out the way that they intended, and they need to add another option there as well. So after that, we've got jumping down, we got Bucks. Again, then this is the same thing that happened in the other draft here. We got a nice little gap here, unfortunately, where we're taking a lot of defensive players here because it's a defense-heavy draft. And then at number 21, Steelers. The difference here is that Mel Kiper had the Steelers mock to get Ty Simpson. Steelers here in Daniel Jeremiah's draft, Denzel Boston. I prefer this. This would be my preference for them. I do think that we're probably going to see here, hopefully in the next couple of weeks. And Steelers fans are not going to like it. Don't get mad at me. I do think you are going to get Aaron Rodgers back one more year there. At the end of the day, I don't know that Ty Simpson is special to the point where they have to force it. And that there's a big difference between somebody that they can get on day two. I think it's a little bit more bunched together. Now there's a separation between him and the others, but it's not such a big separation that they might not want to make the investment here in another position like wide receiver. Obviously, we're going to see some changes in this offense shifting to Mike McCarthy. I'm excited from a fantasy perspective. I know that Steelers fans are not excited. This was not the move that they wanted. But from a fantasy perspective, we know exactly, like Fantasy Minute, we know exactly what we're getting with Mike McCarthy. We know. We knew what we were getting with Arthur Smith, right? And we know exactly what we're getting with Mike McCarthy, and it is going to be a fantasy upgrade for us. He will actually push pass volume. He enjoys that. He's not going to be an extremely run-heavy offense. We'll see, still use good usage of the running backs here. I kind of think we might see Kenneth Gainwell retained there. Obviously, the Steelers like him a lot. And I think that he is a running back that Mike McCarthy would love. That's a very good fit because he likes a nice, well-rounded back that can catch and pass block. He likes very reliable, dependable backs. So perhaps they do retain him. But regardless, we are going to see pass volume increase here no matter who is throwing, and they need another wide receiver to do this. Calvin Austin has technically been the wide receiver too. Calvin Austin is now on the market as a free agent. Re-signing him, investing that money when you pretty much know the outcome there doesn't make a ton of sense to me. So adding another wide receiver, whether that is via free agency, I don't think they'll do it via the trade. I don't think so. Not again. Whether they get a wide receiver to be a free agency, they could. But the problem with that is that the wide receivers in free agency are, let me pull up my list to verify, but a lot of them are more of the guys that would not be my ideal personnel to play off of DK Metcalf, right? Like a Wan'Dale Robinson could play off of DK Metcalf very well. That'd be a little cute combination, right? But the best version of DK Metcalf we've seen clearly was the version that was playing off of Tyler Lockett. And that's good because the diversity of skill set makes a ton of sense. So I think they need more of the smaller, shiftier, over the middle type of wide receiver to allow DK Metcalf to be DK Metcalf, because I just don't think we've seen him be a target hog kind of 1 year, but that's not the ideal version of him. I think the whole 100 to maybe 120 max targets is more of a realistic range for him. And they need somebody else that can get at that 100 mark as well. So going into the draft and getting a wide receiver, probably the best route here, especially in what is a very strong wide receiver class, in my opinion. Good move here. Obviously, they need to rehabilitate that defense a little bit there. It got a little sloppy towards the end of the year, but the investment at wide receiver here, I like that a ton. I don't like this number 22 mock for selfish reasons. One, so Kenyon Sadiq to the Chargers at 22. I'm not a fan of this pick. And I will say, obviously, there's some bias in there because I like Oronde Gadsden. And I think that worked out perfectly fine. And I would like to see Oronde Gadsden continue as the tight end one there. The fact that and we'll see. Obviously, there's the change at offensive coordinator. We know that Mike McDaniel can have very creative usage with a strong pass catching tight end. Oronde Gadsden can do that, right? I don't think that they have to bring in another body. I think he can fulfill the role that Mike McDaniel has typically had when he's found that tight end that really works for him, right? I get it, because at the end of the day, the common theme that I'm seeing is that people want the Chargers to add pass catchers very much so desperately. I don't think that's the best route for them to go. The lack of, and the reason that they're doing it, right? I think we talked about this a lot last week's episode. The reason that they're doing it is because Keenan Allen was an extremely strong role overall in terms of targets in that offense last year. But there was a clear shift in the back half of the season to where he started to be phased out. His snaps went down, his targets went down significantly. And that to me says that they know the vision of this offense. The vision of this offense can work with Ladd McConkey, Quentin Johnston, Trey Harris, and Oronde Gadsden. I don't think it's necessary to add in another high-end pass catcher, because at the end of the day, their problem was not that pass catchers were inadequate. Their problem was that, one, offensive coordinator had a stale system, and two, their offensive line went down with significant injuries that they just could not recover from, right? They tried to, the depth, guys kept getting hurt. And at the end of the day, there's only so much depth you can have, which again, this is why we think they should add depth at offensive line, just in case here. But at the end of the day, if the offensive line is set and good, the ball then can get to the pass catchers, similar to what we saw earlier in the season, where we saw significant usage consistently of Quentin Johnston. And say what you want, he was drafted in the first round as well. So those are two first-round assets that they have in him and Ladd McConkey. Well, was Ladd early second round? Actually, now I'm questioning myself. I think Ladd might have been early second round there. I can't remember if he was late first or early second off the top of my head. But those are two very high-end investments that they have, and investments that with Quentin Johnston has improved every single year. They clearly like him. They've spoken very highly of him, so they can make it work with what they have. I don't love pass catcher here for them, quite frankly. But that's my not so short and sweet version of that. Next that we see in terms of offensive players is, again, as I told you guys, the Bills will be consistently mocked a wide variety of wide receivers, and we're just going to have to figure out who fits that role the best. I don't know that Malachi Fields is the best fit for their offense. I do think that logically, him being the next guy off the board does make sense. So it's not a misplace in terms of him being drafted there. I just think it's a misplace in terms of maybe not being the best fit for their offense. I think that might be a mock of them trying to specifically replace Keon Coleman. And again, I think they need to go another route in terms of style, though. But that then has a giant, massive gap for us until we get to 32 with the Seahawks and KC Concepcion. That's a fun pick. I like that. From a fantasy perspective, I don't love it, because I think at this point, now granted, we will have, new offensive coordinator, so perhaps some slight tweaks in terms of philosophy. The only thing that I don't love about it here, and I love this as a pick for them. I love this as a pick for their offense. I don't love it from a fantasy perspective, because Jackson Smith-Njigba is such a target hog. So unless they make that adjustment there, it just makes it so that the second option is just not consistent from a fantasy perspective. And I would love Concepcion to go to somewhere where he can be a consistent target hog within an offense. I think he's worth it for that. So I would love to see him in a different landing spot, personally, for our fantasy purposes. But this would be a fine pick for the Seahawks, and it does make sense in terms of them, one, trying to replace, obviously, Rashid Shaheed going on the market, right? In case KC Concepcion can be that same versatile asset. But at the same time, taking good talent as well here. I think that's a fine value for them, that they would not find that same exact talent as Casey Concepcion if they waited until the later second there. But that wraps things up with the mock draft. Checking back to the comments to see if we've got any other thoughts here. What about the other receiver from Ohio State, Jeremiah Smith? He is when is he coming out? Jeremiah Smith is coming out in 2027, theoretically. So sorry. Yeah, we will not see him this year. 2027 is the projected year for him in theory. But again, with NIL, that can always change. But hopefully we will see him in 2027. But yeah, let's touch on, let me see if we missed any other free agency news, but mock drafts in general here. We're going to see some shifts coming from the combine here. It's going to be fun, especially because, again, we're only seeing quarterback is something that is very critical to us. We have a ton of quarterback needy teams, but we know for certain that the only high-end asset, unfortunately, is locked into one specific position, which is not unfortunate. It's good for them, and it's good for us too, because Fernando Mendoza is going to add a lot to the Raiders in terms of riding the ship there. I love it. I love that for them. You just, from a character perspective, they need somebody to get up and get in there and give them a winning mindset. And Mendoza is that kind of guy who can truly operate as a leader and kind of shift the mindset of that team there and kind of get the Raiders in a positive direction, right? So I love that fit for them. And what that will do for Brock Bowers, for Ashton Genty, just positive things on the way there. But again, that means that we just puts us in a weird quarterback position because all of our quarterback needy teams, unfortunately, don't have the opportunity to get a wide receiver or the quarterback of their choice, right? So the combine for us is going to be really key here in trying to look and figure out where these other options are falling in. Does Ty Simpson really deserve that round 1 draft capital? Are we really going to see another Alabama quarterback drafted in the first round here and be potentially an Alabama quarterback as they have been? And then at the same time, can some other options potentially push their way up and become darlings, have a nice showcase here, and be somebody that suddenly shoots up into being a potential late first round draft pick? I don't think it's going to happen, but you never know. So it's something to kind of key in there, and we'll get all the rumors starting here. And then the wide receiver landing spots, obviously you guys see, like, we're getting a good amount of wide receivers in the first round here. And quite frankly, this could be selling it short because, again, this is one of those draft classes where it is entirely possible that a lot of these guys that are not being mocked in the first sneak in there. Again, it's a defense-heavy draft, right? But at the end of the day, this wide receiver class is very strong. So really the second round could be a massive fantasy impact for us as well. A lot of times those second round wide receivers, now granted before, a lot of the second round wide receivers have become very critical for us, but I feel like over the past couple of years, the second round wide receivers have kind of been like a little bit of a letdown for us. We've been getting more value from some of those kind of mid-round darlings, right? Day 3 darlings. But with this draft class, I think a lot of those day 2, round 2 guys are going to come in really valuable for us. So this is going to be fun to see what happens here. So I thought this would be a good way for us to get hyped and prepared for the combine and take a little bit of a break from all the free agency talk because we've been doing a lot of it there. But I think that wraps things up, guys. I appreciate you all tuning in again as we, head into the next couple of weeks here. We'll do some recaps of what we learned from the combine in next week's show, do some reaction to that. Potentially there might be some updated mock drafts available there very quickly after the combine. And then, of course, we are going to be getting some more free agency buzz because we'll be 1 week before. And if there's going to be any additional extensions made from teams with their existing assets, we might see that happen next week as well. Because we're getting close. So excited. I cannot believe it. We're at the end of February. It is done this week. And then we are hitting hard in free agency. And it's going to be fun, guys. So make sure that you are subscribed because as I get the news in here, I'm going to be trying to do trying my hardest here to make sure that as we get all of the news coming in of signings and stuff, that I get those shorts out to you guys as well in terms of the fantasy impact. So make sure that you are subscribed and whatnot. I really appreciate it. And make sure that you are checking out Player Profiler as well. And then also the Dear Miss Fantasy podcast that is available on all platforms. So thank you all for tuning in. I love you all and enjoy the combine. Hopefully we get some really exciting stuff and positive rumors here. I will talk to you all next week. Have a wonderful week, guys. We'll talk to you again very, very soon.